My dad's a pervert, and I can't live in the same house as him anymore. That's what 17-year-old Bernadette Walker wrote in her diary. 3 days later, she was gone. In the quiet cathedral town of Peterborough, nestled in the heart of Cambridgeshire, England, the summer of 2020 should have been like any other. Teens cycling through side streets, parents barbecuing under gray British skies. Life, quiet, normal, uneventful. But beneath one household roof, normal had already stopped existing. And by July 18th, 2020, the unthinkable would happen. Bernadette Walker, bright, artistic, awkward in that teenager way that makes you fall in love with someone's potential, vanished. No witnesses, no confession, no body. Just a teenage girl, swallowed by silence. Her parents claimed she ran away. But the truth was far darker, because the last person to see her alive was her own stepfather. And the story he told? It was a lie. Scott Walker, a man who had lived under the same roof with Bernadette since she was a little girl. He was the one who picked her up the day she disappeared. He was the one who told police she jumped out of the car in the middle of the road. He was the one who turned off his phone for over 90 minutes that afternoon. And he was the one who, when questioned, couldn't explain where he went. But perhaps most chilling of all, he was the one Bernadette had accused. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Bernadette confided in the only place she felt safe, her journal. She wrote about secrets, fear, inappropriate behavior, the kind of trauma no teenager should ever have to articulate. And then, just like that, she was gone. Her phone stopped pinging, her social media went dark. No sightings, no messages, not a single digital footprint, as if someone had gone to great lengths to erase her. For weeks, the community searched. Dogs, drones, divers. Police followed every lead, every rumor, every whispered possibility. But they were always one step behind, because the one man who held the truth was already 2 steps ahead. He crafted lies, deleted messages, invented a story and stuck to it. And beside him, a mother who played along. Sarah Walker, Bernadette's mother, was not only complicit in the cover-up, she was the first person Bernadette turned to when she found the courage to speak out. But Sarah didn't call the police. She didn't report the abuse. She didn't protect her daughter. Instead, she protected the man Bernadette accused. By the time the truth began to unravel, it was too late. The justice system was left to build a case, without a body, without a crime scene, without a single trace of Bernadette's remains. And yet, they did. Because Bernadette's voice was not entirely lost. Her word, scrawled in pencil and fear, were still screaming from the pages of her diary. And those pages would help put a killer behind bars. Scott Walker was sentenced to life in prison, 32 years before parole. Sarah Walker was sentenced for covering up her own daughter's death. But the most haunting part of this case, even now, years later, no one knows where Bernadette is. Her body has never been found. Her final moments remain a mystery. And the man who knew what happened to her died in prison in December of 2023. This is not just the story of a murder. It's the story of a child betrayed by the people who should have loved her most. It's the story of silence, weaponized, of justice with no body, and of a teenager whose words, scribbled in a journal, became her final cry for help. Her name was Bernadette Walker, and this is her story. You're watching True Crime Whispers, where the lost speak through silence and every secret has a voice. Tonight's case, the vanishing of Bernadette Walker, a father's secret, a girl's words, a stepfather's silence, and the mystery that still haunts a town. Before the headlines, before the courtroom, before the missing posters and police dogs and haunting whispers, there was just a girl, Bernadette Walker. She was 17, an age filled with contradictions, caught between childhood and adulthood, between the safety of home and the thrill of independence. Bernadette wasn't the kind of girl to shout for attention, but her light was undeniable. She loved photography. She drew. She journaled, often obsessively and honestly. She spent time exploring thrift shops and decorating her bedroom walls with art and fairy lights and fragments of dreams. She had a quiet magic about her, not the loud, performative kind, but the kind you notice if you're paying close attention. At school, Bernadette was described as sweet, reserved, and artsy, not the type to cause trouble. The kind of girl who'd write poetry instead of going to parties, who would rather stay up reading than sneak out with friends. She kept a close circle, trusted few, but when she let you in, she loved deeply. Teachers remembered her as polite and intelligent, a girl with big eyes and bigger potential. Friends said she was the type who listened more than she spoke, but when she did speak, it mattered. But even as she smiled for school pictures, Bernadette was carrying something heavy, something she didn't know how to say out loud. At least not at first, because the place she should have felt safest, home, was the place that made her feel most alone. The Walker household was full. Sarah and Scott, her parents, had 7 children between them. The home was loud, chaotic, and crowded. A patchwork family trying to function and often failing behind closed doors. Sarah Walker was Bernadette's biological mother, a woman with a complicated past, difficult relationships, legal troubles, instability. She had Bernadette young, and over the years she drifted from one relationship to the next, eventually settling down with Scott Walker. Scott wasn't Bernadette's real father, but he raised her, at least in the traditional sense. To neighbors, he seemed like a family man. He was active in the kids' lives, did school runs, posted about family on Facebook. But behind closed doors, something wasn't right. There were rumors of arguments, tension, control. And then there was the secret Bernadette was too scared to share. In June 2020, Bernadette confided in her diary, and for the first time, she put in writing the truth that had been haunting her. She accused Scott Walker of sexually abusing her. She didn't scream. She didn't go to police. She wrote it down, a silent scream, in pencil and paper. And when she finally did speak out, to her own mother, Sarah didn't believe her. Not only did she deny her daughter's words, she sided with Scott, the man Bernadette had called a monster, the man she feared, the man she claimed had violated her trust in the most intimate, unforgivable way. And Sarah chose him. From that moment on, Bernadette was alone. She was still living under the same roof as the man she accused, still surrounded by the chaos of siblings and domestic noise, but utterly isolated. There were no safety plans, no police reports, no therapist visits, no intervention, just silence, and a growing sense that no one was coming to help her. Her behavior began to shift. She withdrew further, stopped responding to messages, became more emotionally erratic. She started talking about leaving, about not being able to stay in the house, about how she couldn't take it anymore. And in those final days, she was desperate to be heard. But no one listened. The Walker household presented itself as functional, but the dysfunction was layered beneath. Scott ruled the home, not through violence necessarily, but through presence, a looming authority, a manipulator. Sarah stayed silent, whether out of fear, denial, or twisted loyalty. She didn't act. And the children, they did what children do best in chaos. They adapted. They survived. But Bernadette, she wanted more than survival. On July 17th, 2020, Bernadette made one last attempt to be heard. She told her school what had happened, and for the first time, someone listened. School authorities contacted social services. A formal child protection inquiry was triggered, and by law, Scott was not supposed to be near her while the investigation began. But Sarah, her own mother, went against those instructions and let Scott pick Bernadette up the next morning. That car ride was the last time anyone ever saw Bernadette Walker alive. According to Scott, she jumped out of the car during an argument, that she ran off barefoot without her phone. But there were no witnesses, no CCTV, no credible sightings, no messages, no trace, just silence, the kind that follows when something terrible has happened. The family would wait nearly 2 full days to report her missing, And even then, only because they were told to. And from the moment the police got involved, the lies began unraveling. The Walker home wasn't just dysfunctional, it was dangerous. Bernadette Walker wasn't a runaway. She was a child, a daughter, a sister, an artist, a survivor, until she wasn't. And behind the closed doors of a family home in Peterborough, her truth was smothered by the very people she trusted most. In every crime, there is a moment when everything changes, a before and an after, for Bernadette Walker. That moment came in July of 2020, when silence broke and a secret was finally spoken aloud. On the 16th of July, Bernadette Walker made a disclosure that would change everything. Quietly, carefully, she told someone at school what she'd been too afraid to say at home. She told them her stepfather, Scott Walker, had been sexually abusing her. She said she had been too scared to report it, that she no longer felt safe at home, that she couldn't be around him anymore. It wasn't the first time she'd told someone, but it was the first time someone listened. School staff did exactly what they were trained to do. They filed a safeguarding report. Urgently. By law, a child protection inquiry was launched. Bernadette was now considered at risk. Authorities made a critical decision. Scott Walker was not to have contact with her, but the ink on the paperwork hadn't even dried before that decision was ignored. The very next morning, July 17th, Scott Walker picked Bernadette up from her grandparents' house. He wasn't supposed to. In fact, authorities had explicitly stated that he should not be near her. But Sarah Walker, Bernadette's mother, allowed it. She handed her daughter back to the man Bernadette had accused of abuse. According to Scott, it was just a drive. An argument-filled trip meant to clear the air. He claimed they fought. He claimed Bernadette was upset. And then, somewhere outside Peterborough, he claimed she jumped out of the car and ran off, barefoot, without her phone, without a trace. That was his story. It was a story that didn't sit right. Not with investigators. Not with those who knew Bernadette. She didn't run away. She wasn't reckless. And if she had run, why had Scott waited nearly 48 hours to report her missing? That question would become the first crack in Scott Walker's carefully constructed lie. On July 20th, 3 days after the so-called drive, Sarah and Scott finally contacted police. They said Bernadette was missing, that she had run away, that she was probably with a friend. But the moment detectives began to ask questions, the inconsistencies started to pile up. Scott said Bernadette jumped out of the car, but couldn't remember exactly where, or when, or what road they were on. He said he didn't chase after her. He just drove around a bit and then went home. No 911 call, no report to authorities, no mention to anyone until it was too late. Sarah, meanwhile, said she was just giving her space, that Bernadette had done this before. But there was no phone activity, no social media posts, no text to friends, no withdrawals from her bank card. It was as if Bernadette had vanished from the earth. And then came the data. Investigators pulled Scott's cell phone records. They accessed GPS data from his vehicle. And what they found told a very different story. Scott hadn't just been driving around. He had driven miles out into rural farmland, stopped in several isolated locations for long stretches of time, then returned home, alone. What was he doing there? Why had he lied about the route? What was he hiding? And most importantly, where was Bernadette? Police now feared the worst, but Scott Walker was just getting started. Days after Bernadette was last seen, Scott and Sarah were caught on CCTV, disposing of bags, wiping down devices, resetting phones, deleting messages. They told police they were just cleaning the house, but the timing was too precise, too coordinated, too rehearsed. Bernadette's phone, gone. Her diaries, burned. Her online accounts, accessed and manipulated. Forensics found traces of Bernadette's DNA on clothing Scott had worn that day. But more disturbing was what wasn't found, her body. Despite exhaustive searches across Cambridgeshire, fields, rivers, woods, drainage ditches, abandoned buildings, Bernadette's remains were never recovered. It was as if she had been erased. In September 2020, 2 months after Bernadette disappeared, Scott Walker was arrested and charged with her murder. Sarah Walker was charged with perverting the course of justice, and yet Scott continued to lie, to claim innocence, to shift his story every time evidence came forward. But what Scott didn't know was that investigators were already on to him. They found messages between Scott and Sarah, planning what to say, plotting how to make it look like Bernadette had run away. But one message stood out: we have to get our story straight. The courtroom would hear it all: the abuse, the lies, the manipulation, the silence, and behind it all, a terrified girl whose truth was buried with her. Bernadette Walker trusted her voice would finally be heard. She told the truth. She reached out. But what she didn't know was that telling the truth would cost her everything, and her stepfather would go to unthinkable lengths to silence her forever. The first 48 hours of any missing persons case are the most critical. But in the case of Bernadette Walker, those hours were already gone, not because she vanished in the dead of night, but because the people who should have sounded the alarm didn't. Now, the burden fell on investigators to reconstruct a story full of holes, to uncover a truth that someone had gone to great lengths to bury, and to do it without a body, without a confession, and with time running out. The investigation officially began on July 21, 2020, when Bernadette was formally declared a missing person. But it didn't take long before police realized this was no ordinary case. Sarah and Scott Walker had reported her missing late, too late. Their accounts of what happened were vague, inconsistent, and sometimes contradictory. When asked where Bernadette had run off to, Scott said she exited the vehicle during a heated argument, but couldn't say where, or what road, or whether he had gone looking for her. Sarah claimed she thought her daughter had gone to stay with friends, yet couldn't name a single friend Bernadette had contacted. Their stories didn't match. Their behavior didn't match. And something else caught the attention of investigators. They weren't acting like parents of a missing child. There was no panic, no desperation, no urgency in trying to find Bernadette. And then came the technology, because if Scott Walker thought he could outsmart detectives, he hadn't counted on digital forensics. Scott told police he had driven Bernadette around to talk, but the GPS data from his phone told a different story. The car had traveled to a remote area near Calbet, an area known for vast, flat farmland and drainage ditches. It sat idle in an isolated spot for 91 minutes. Then it moved again, this time toward the A47. Another stop, another long pause, and finally, home. For police, the implications were chilling. Why spend over an hour in a deserted area with a girl who was never seen again? Why lie about the route? Why erase your digital footprints? Unless, of course, you were trying to hide something. While Scott tried to manipulate the future, investigators were digging into the past, and what they found shattered them. Bernadette had been keeping a diary. In it, she detailed months of fear, confusion, and pain. She wrote about Scott, about the abuse, about being afraid to come forward. The pages were raw, emotional, and gut-wrenchingly honest. My dad's a pervert. I can't live in the same house as him. He touches me, and I freeze. These weren't the words of a confused teenager. They were the cries of a girl who had been violated and believed no one would help her. But someone did listen, her school. Unfortunately, by the time the system reacted, it was already too late. Back at home, while investigators worked around the clock, Scott and Sarah were deleting files, burning items, erasing history. In one recorded search, Scott Googled how to permanently delete WhatsApp messages. In another, how long before a body decomposes. The walls were closing in, and fast. The couple's phones revealed a digital trail of panic. In one text, Sarah asked Scott, "What are we telling the police again?" In another, "Should I delete the thing from her room?" There were no words of grief, no fear for their daughter's safety, just strategy, just spin, just cover-up. Scotland Yard's digital forensic unit launched a full extraction of both parents' devices. It took weeks, but the results were damning. WhatsApp chats were recovered, deleted location histories reconstructed, Internet search terms flagged and cataloged. They found that Bernadette's accounts had been accessed after she disappeared. Someone had tried to send fake messages to make it look like she was still alive, but the digital fingerprint pointed straight back to Scott and Sarah. It wasn't Bernadette sending those messages, it was her killers. By September, police had enough. Scott Walker was arrested for murder. Sarah Walker was charged with obstructing justice. Still, neither would admit to anything. But they didn't have to. The lies had already crumbled. The evidence spoke louder than any confession. And Bernadette's voice, though silenced, had finally been heard. To this day, Bernadette Walker's body has never been found. Her final resting place remains a mystery. But her story, why does not? Thanks to the determination of investigators and the digital echo of a girl who refused to be erased, the truth emerged, and justice followed. She was 17, a student, a daughter, a victim. But above all, she was brave, and in the end, it was her bravery that brought the darkness to light. A courtroom is meant to be a place of justice, but for the family of Bernadette Walker, justice came without closure. No body, no burial, no chance to say goodbye. Only empty seats in the gallery, and silence where a daughter should have been. But in that silence, the truth began to speak. On June 21st, 2021, nearly 1 year after Bernadette vanished, the trial of Scott and Sarah Walker began at Cambridge Crown Court. The charge: for Scott Walker, murder; for Sarah Walker, perverting the course of justice and obstructing the investigation. The prosecution laid it bare from the start. This wasn't a case of a runaway teenager. This was a carefully orchestrated cover-up by the very people meant to protect her. Bernadette was only 17, a bright, artistic student with dreams of becoming a photographer. A girl who kept a diary not for attention, but for survival. The prosecution presented a chilling timeline of events. Scott Walker had taken Bernadette on a so-called drive to talk things out. But instead of bringing her home, he took her phone, he took her voice, and, most damningly, he took her life. The court heard how Scott's vehicle had idled for over an hour in a remote area of Cowbit. Prosecutors argued this was the window of time in which Bernadette was killed and disposed of. No CCTV, no eyewitnesses. But the data, the silent observer, told its own story. Then came the digital evidence. Scott had tried to cover his tracks. He deleted messages. He sent fake texts from Bernadette's account after she was already gone. He searched how long it takes for a body to decompose. He Googled how to delete WhatsApp permanently. But digital footprints are stubborn, and detectives had recovered nearly all of it. Sarah Walker didn't commit the murder, but prosecutors made one thing clear. She helped hide it. Evidence showed Sarah knew Bernadette was dead and chose to lie for Scott. She helped send the fake texts, helped delete diary pages, helped create the illusion that her daughter was just another runaway, all to protect a man who had stolen everything. Witnesses came forward, teachers, friends, social workers. Each voice painted a clearer picture of Bernadette's final months. One teacher read directly from her diary, tears in their eyes. "My dad's a pervert. He touches me. I can't live in the same house as him." The jury listened in stunned silence. Even veteran court officials were shaken. One juror later said they had never heard something so heartbreaking or so avoidable. The defense argued that Bernadette had indeed run away, that no murder had taken place, that Scott was guilty only of panicking, not killing. But the evidence was overwhelming. The cover-up was calculated, the lies coordinated, and Bernadette's silence spoke louder than any testimony. On July 23, 2021, after weeks of harrowing testimony, Scott Walker was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 32 years. Sarah Walker was sentenced to 6 years for her role in the cover-up. The judge did not mince words. He called Scott cold, calculating, and dangerous. And then he spoke the line that echoed through the court. "You took her voice, you took her life, and you did it while the world trusted you to protect her." But even in justice, there was pain. Bernadette's body has never been found. Her final moments remain a mystery. There is no grave, No tombstone, no place for friends to visit, just unanswered questions and memories trapped in the pages of a diary. Most murder cases end with a body. This one didn't, and that fact haunts everyone who loved her. It haunts the detectives. It haunts the jurors. It haunts a community that will never fully heal. But perhaps most haunting of all is knowing that for so long, Bernadette was trying to be heard, and no one listened until it was too late. She was young, she was scared, and she was silenced. But now her story is told, and her truth finally has been heard. The trial was over. The sentence had been delivered. But justice, true justice, still felt incomplete. Because even with Scott Walker behind bars, even with Sarah convicted for her role in the cover-up, there remained one question, one wound still open and bleeding. Where is Bernadette Walker? In the days following the verdict, the focus shifted to Sarah Walker, a mother, a woman once described as devoted, soft-spoken, and compassionate, but also a woman who, when faced with her daughter's desperate cries for help, chose silence. Sarah was sentenced to 6 years in prison, not for killing her daughter, but for choosing to help the man who did. The court heard that she deleted Bernadette's data, fabricated messages, lied to the police, lied to the public, and worst of all, lied to herself. In a haunting interview transcript from her prison intake, Sarah was quoted as saying, "I thought I was protecting my family. I didn't realize what I was losing in the process. But by then, it was far too late." On August 4th, 2023, just 2 years into his life sentence, Scott Walker was found dead inside his cell at HMP Franklin. Official cause of death? Suicide by hanging. He left no note, no confession, no indication of remorse, just a trail of pain and the enduring silence surrounding Bernadette's final resting place. Some called it justice. Others called it cowardice. But for those who loved Bernadette, his death didn't bring peace. It brought more questions. Because whatever secrets Scott took with him, he took all the way to the grave. To this day, Bernadette's body has never been found. Search teams have scoured miles of countryside. Drones, cadaver dogs, forensic teams, volunteers, all came up empty. No clothing, no remains, no final resting place. In many ways, it's the cruelest twist of all, because without a body, there is no closure, no way to say goodbye, no place to grieve, just a cold ache, and a question that echoes louder with each passing year. Where is she? But while some answers remain out of reach, Bernadette's name has not faded. Her memory has become a movement. Schools across Cambridgeshire now teach more robust safeguarding policies. Teen support hotlines have been expanded, and a scholarship in Bernadette's name now helps young photographers pursue their dreams. What began as a tragedy has become a call to action. Teachers now say her story is taught not as a scare tactic, but as a symbol of why every voice must be heard, especially the quiet ones, especially those who write in diaries, especially those whose pain is hidden behind smiles. In Peterborough, a local artist painted a mural in Bernadette's honor. Her face, gentle, vibrant, and full of hope, now watches over a wall near her old school. Community fundraisers have raised thousands for abuse prevention programs. Annual walks are held every July in her memory, and a charity in her name, Bernie's Light, offers emergency aid to teens in abusive homes. Her legacy isn't just one of tragedy. It's of survival, of resilience, of a community that said, never again. Bernadette's voice was silenced in life, but in death it has grown louder and stronger. Bernadette was never just a headline. She was a daughter, a friend, an artist, a soul who deserved to be heard. And while we may never know exactly where she lies, one thing is certain, her story will never be buried. This is for Bernadette. Bernadette Walker should be alive today. She should be pursuing photography, going to university, falling in love, laughing with friends, and living without fear. But instead, she is a name we speak with reverence, a face frozen in time, a voice heard only through pages of her diary, and a warning to us all. Bernadette tried to speak up. She tried to reach out. And in the end, she paid the ultimate price for trying to protect herself. Abuse doesn't always leave bruises. Sometimes it hides behind smiles, behind closed doors, behind silence. If you or someone you know is struggling, please speak up. Please reach out, because silence protects the abuser, never the abused. And if Bernadette's story teaches us anything, it's that one voice, one warning, one cry for help must never be ignored. What do you think really happened to Bernadette? Do you believe Scott acted alone, or was there more to the story? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one, and your thoughts matter. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, made you cry, made you think, please consider subscribing to this channel. We tell these stories not just to remember the victims, but to protect the living. Hit the like button so this case reaches more people. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and join our community, because the more eyes on these stories, the louder our collective voice becomes. And if you're already part of the True Crime Whispers family, thank you. Your support gives these victims a voice, and it keeps their stories alive. If this case disturbed you, you won't believe what happened in the case of Leliana Wright, a little girl, a system that failed her, and a crime so brutal it shocked the entire nation. Click here to watch that episode next, because the fight for justice never ends.